Hello and welcome to Written Words. I'm Helen and today's video is about just one word. It's a very interesting word that has the potential to spark debates, and it's also a word that can tell us a lot about the history of the English language and the people who speak it. If speakers of British English hear the word gotten, it has a very American ring to it. For example, if someone said, his comments have gotten a lot of replies. In British English, we would say, his comments have got a lot of replies. If we say, it's gotten cold in here, in British English, we would say, it's got cold in here, or it's become cold in here. So you might think that gotten is an American word, but it's actually not quite as simple as that. In modern English, that may be the case, but it hasn't always been that way. So let's explore this word a little more closely. Let's start with the etymology. Etymology is the study of where words come from and how they develop. And in English, that can be extremely interesting because English has developed from so many other languages over the centuries. So our humble little word gotten originated from Old Norse. So it was a word that was brought here to Britain by the Vikings. The original Old Norse word was geta, which looks like the word get and is more or less what it means. Its past tense is gatum, which in modern English has become got, and its past participle was geten, which you can see is where we've got gotten from. Then the English language began to develop, and so did our little word, and we can see uses of it in literature throughout the ages. For example, Geoffrey Chaucer in his Canterbury Tales uses a version of it. Let's have a look at an example. In the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, when Chaucer is introducing us to all the people in the group who are about to tell their different tales, he introduces the clerk. If I tell you that courtepy, according to the glossary in my edition, means a kind of coat, we can see here that it was threadbare, so he had gotten no benefit from it. And the word here is spelt a little bit differently. It hasn't quite developed into the spelling we use today, but it's still recognisable. So having found some instances of this word in Chaucer, I then moved on a few hundred years and had a look in Shakespeare to see if Shakespeare uses this word, and he does. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales were written between 1386 and 1389. And Shakespeare lived from 1564 to 1616. So by now the word has changed a little bit and it is now recognisable as the gotten we know today. One example from Richard II, Act 5, Scene 5, says this. In this passage, the groom of the stable is talking to King Richard. I was a poor groom of thy stable, King, when thou wert king, who, travelling towards York, with much ado at length have gotten leave to look upon my sometimes royal master's face. So in that passage, the groom is explaining how he has gotten permission, gotten leave, to see his master's face, to meet the king in person. Another 100 or so years later, Daniel Defoe was writing Robinson Crusoe. And guess what? He uses the word gotten in there too. But having gotten over these things in some measure, and having settled my household stuff and habitation, made me a table and a chair, and all as handsome about me as I could, I began to keep my journal. So he's gotten over the things that were preventing him from keeping his journal, and he's now able to start writing. Robinson Crusoe was written in 1719, but about a century before that, a shift began to take place in the English language, and indeed in history. The town where I live has connections with the Pilgrim Fathers, and they sailed in the ship the Mayflower in 1620 to America, and they settled in Massachusetts. And this kicked off a wave of migration as people moved from Britain to America. And of course, as the people moved, they took their language with them, and consequently the English language split into two branches, which developed independently of each other. So the English-speaking people who went to America carried on speaking their language, but of course language changes over time with usage. And the language used in America changed gradually. But at the same time, the people back in Britain were still speaking English, but British English followed its own path and adapted to the situation in Britain and the needs of the people who spoke it. So gradually, over the centuries, as English was spoken in these two different communities on different sides of the Atlantic, new words emerged which were used on one side but not the other. Accents changed and developed. And one of the things that changed was the use of the word gotten. The people who went to America kept their word gotten, but in Britain the word gradually fell out of usage around about the 19th century. It's not something that would have happened overnight, of course. It's something that takes a very long time. So I went back to look for some more examples from literature to see if I could find any usage of gotten in the 19th century. And where better to look than Dickens. Dickens, it turns out, doesn't use the word gotten very much at all, which suggests it is falling out of usage. It's not a word that's very common anymore in Dickens' time. However, I did find one example of it in Our Mutual Friend. It was the face belonging to a naturally slow or inattentive intellect that had toiled hard to get what it had won, and that had to hold it now that it was gotten. So if I used the search function correctly as I was searching through the text of Our Mutual Friend, that is the one and only time that word is used in this book, which is a very large book with many hundreds of pages. So by the late 20th century, gotten had effectively disappeared from usage in British English, and it had become something that was associated with American English. However, although gotten itself has gone from British English, there are still reminders of it in some other words. For example, the past participle of the word beget is begotten, and the past participle of forget is forgotten. And there is also the phrase ill-gotten, which means something that somebody has acquired through less than honest means. However, in the present day, with the increasingly global technology that we have with TV, the internet, mobile communications, and people travelling around the world much more easily, we are seeing another shift in the way language is used. Language is changing much more rapidly than it used to do because people can communicate with people in other countries much more easily than in the past. And so although it might be unusual for my generation and older to use a word like gotten, I do hear the younger generation using words like that much more frequently in the present day. So perhaps gotten, possibly along with many other words, is making its way back into British English. So that was a little journey through history with just one word. There are, of course, lots of other words in the English language that have interesting stories to tell too, and I'm sure some of them will feature in future videos. My next video, however, is going to be in a slightly different vein. I decided to have a little bit of fun in the next one, and it's going to be a little literary quiz. So if quizzes are your thing, and if you want to test your knowledge of literature, watch this space for my next video. So thank you very much for joining me in this one. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And in the meantime, happy reading and happy writing.